am I going to divorce my faith the way my husband divorced me? Do I divorce God the way my husband divorced me?
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonen, faith columnist and features writer for The Forum, author, and speaker. In this episode, I ask Kerri Bishop from the Single Mom Smiling website and podcast, is there a place for the divorced in church? Kerri Bishop was pregnant with her fifth child when she found herself in an unimagined, unwanted situation, tasting the bitterness of divorce. In the depths of feeling abandoned, there were moments when Kerri lost sight of God's role in her life. She quickly realized, however, that it wasn't God who'd abandoned her. In fact, she'd need him more than ever now, and her faith to anchor her in the years to come. I met Kerri online through what was then Twitter, reading the article she'd written telling of her heart-wrenching experience of spousal abandonment. As a fellow mother of 5, I was drawn into her life, and not long after our crossing online, we had the chance to meet in person and even experienced a slumber party together. Kerri's challenges of raising 5 boys as a newly divorced single mom who resisted her family's breakup is difficult but inspiring. I've been impressed by her strong, tenacious faith and how she's persisted in trusting in the church being a dispensary of grace despite the countless challenges she's faced. Even more, I've been warmed seeing her heart for other parents who have been abandoned through divorce and how much she desires to help bring freedom to others who feel bound by their circumstances. I know Kerri's story will inspire you, so let's get to it. Well, good morning, Kerri. Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance.
Thanks, Roxanne. I'm so excited to be here. I really appreciate giving me this time to discuss this important topic.
Well, as soon as I found out you were doing a podcast as well, we both started earlier this year. I think I was just a few months ahead of you. I immediately thought you'd be a great guest. And I think this topic of divorce that we're going to discuss today, is there a place for the divorced in church, is so important. I know that divorce wasn't something you wanted, and that it's continued to be hard through the years. The challenges have been great, and I'm so grateful for your friendship. You've really enlightened me on this topic and given me a heart for others who've been abandoned in their marriage. And, I had issues in my own marriage. I mean, raising 5 kids and 2 people coming together, 2 separate people with different journeys coming together is difficult. And there were some crossroads there that I think we came close to that as well. So I think that was another reason that I was drawn to your story. I just wanted to know, how did you make it through to the other side? And there was such a hope in that title, Single Mom Smiling. So I want to go into that later. But before we go there, let's just get acquainted with Kerri Bishop. Who are you? Where are you from? Let's start there.
Yeah, I'm from New York. I was born and raised here. I left for a while and taught, Catholic school down in North Carolina and things like that. But I've always returned to New York, which is kind of my home. It's where my family is and where, it's beautiful here. It's beautiful in this state. I'm not a city person, but I just love New York State. And yeah.
I know most people, we've talked about this, who think about New York, they think of New York City, of course. And I think sometimes people think of Minneapolis as Minnesota as well. But tell us a little about what is the place where you live? What's it like? Is rural more, or how big of a city?
We're a few hours outside of New York City. The town I grew up in, I don't live there anymore, but the town I grew up in is a typical small town, suburban. We have 1 traffic light. I remember we had just gotten a 24-hour convenience store when I was, I don't know, probably 20 years old or something. I don't remember how old I was, but I was pretty old. We, very antique-y, very quaint. Everybody, actually, we had a K-12 high school, middle school, elementary school. So you graduated from one side of the building and went to the other side of the building. So that's kind of where I grew up. And, church was a big part of it. Most of the people in our town were Catholic. I think everybody went to some church, mostly Christian. There were a few other religions in there, but most of us were Christian. And that's pretty much our background.
That sounds pretty familiar. We just had one traffic light as well in our town. We did have a convenience store or two. We were on a highway, so a major highway, but still, it was just kind of a little blink in the road. So anyway, yeah, that's good to know. So siblings, and then tell us a little bit about your faith and how strong it was, or what your relationship with God was during those early years.
Yeah, I have three younger brothers who we were pretty tight. We were pretty close. We still are, actually. Gosh, I'd have to think. With my siblings, I believe we're up to 15 grandchildren with my mom, and we are still really super connected, especially my two older brothers and I, or the two that are closest to me, I guess, not older than me, but closest in the family, age-wise. Our kids are all between, I'd have to think, like 13 and 28, I believe. So what is that? 12 of them between those years. So it's neat to see them. And then my younger brother, who had his children a little later, those kids are like the babies of the older kids. So it's really neat to see all the siblings and cousins and everybody else get together, really supportive. And, family has made such a huge difference in having my brothers support me, just emotionally and mentally, spiritually, financially. Sometimes it's been a huge help, by my mom. My mom has been a big help in a lot of ways also.
That's awesome. Yeah. My mom is just like the sweetest mom, and just has just a very simple faith of just relying on God for everything. And those things make a difference. And hopefully we can make that impact on our own children. So you go off to college and ended up getting married and had a great life as far as you knew. And so tell us what happened.
Yeah, it was funny. My little brother and his little brother set us up on a blind date, and we thought everything was absolutely wonderful. We got married, typical story. We actually had our first real challenge when we lost our first baby to an ectopic pregnancy that almost took my life also. That was a devastating experience, and that was like the first time we really had some issues. After that, the doctor had told us that we might not be able to have children, and things were tough. I did get pregnant right away, which was amazing. We counted that as such a little blessing. And then we had 4 kids in 6 years, and just life got crazy. We thought we were done having children. And then 6 years later, I had my last little surprise little blessing, that, the one that tells us God's plans are always better than our own.
That's right. And he's the one that's remaining in your home now, right?
He's yep. He would kill me if he heard me say he was my little guy, but he is. He's taller than I am now, but yes, he's my baby. He's my, he's awesome. He's wonderful.
But it was during that pregnancy, as I recall, that your husband decided to part ways. And tell us a little bit about that, because as a mother who's been pregnant, and it's a lot. 5 children is a lot. Having 4 children and being pregnant with your 5th is a lot. I think people thought we were crazy, and I was a little bit overwhelmed. Number 5 was like such a blessing, but just a little bit of a surprise. And so, and it happened during a time that my husband had lost his job, and we were going through a lot of turmoil during that time. So I kind of I know what that stress can be like. So what was going on in your life, and just share a little bit about, I guess, that being abandoned in that time of vulnerability.
Right. Well, you know what? Our marriage certainly had ups and downs. I don't want to make it sound like everything was perfect. I know we've talked about marriage difficulties and marriage struggles and how hard marriage can be. And it certainly was for us. We had financial problems. We had all sorts of other things. I had some past abuse issues that I needed to deal with that were really difficult and definitely strained our relationship. One of the biggest things was my ex-husband was at the Trade Center site on 9/11. And watched the planes fly over his head. I know that caused some real wounds, real deep wounds in him. So that was something that caused problems. We did, I hate to say it, but we did let the word divorce enter our relationship sometime. I just didn't think it was ever going to actually happen to us. And the year before my husband left, everything was wonderful. We had been building a house together. The kids were a little bit older. My 4th son at that point, the youngest, was entering kindergarten. I was talking about going back and getting my teaching license updated. I had been an elementary school teacher, and that had expired while I stayed home with my kids. everything seemed to be going well. My husband and I were like friends. We were starting to go out together again. Like, when you're just so caught up in like little kids and try and like just keep one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
And
you finally get a date night every once in a while.
Right. And, he bought me great Christmas presents that year. We had planned to go away for vacation that summer. We just bought new dining room furniture. Everything seemed like it was really going well for the first time in a long time. We actually renewed our vows on Valentine's Day that year. And I got pregnant in December and pretty quickly knew I was pregnant. I was afraid to tell my husband because I wasn't sure, like I didn't want to rock the boat. This had been, like I said, it had been the best year. And I was like, oh gosh, where does this go, Lord? I got very sick with the pregnancy. I was on a home IV. I had extreme drops in blood pressure. They were concerned that the baby had Graves' syndrome and some other, hyperemesis gravidarum, some real difficulties for long-term mental and physical health for the baby. And I think all of the stress and everything else, I don't know. Around the same time, right after I announced that I was pregnant or told my husband that I was pregnant, he reconnected with somebody on social media. It was when Facebook was really just starting to make that big jump into, the world. And, I can't even imagine a world without social media now. And I wish we had it for more than, wish we could eliminate social media for more than just my circumstances. But, yeah, he reconnected with a former girlfriend on social media. They had dated in high school. I did not know that. I knew he'd reconnected with a bunch of old friends and that he was getting together with her and another guy and that they were going out to dinner. I was very sick with the baby and we had 4 other little kids at home, so I couldn't go. But like I said, we had just spent the best year ever. And even my ex had said, yes, it was the best year ever when he left. He agreed to that, but there it goes.
Wow.
So 2 days before Mother's Day, I was coaching my son's Little League team. My ex was supposed to be the coach, but he hadn't been coming home, and he didn't come home that day. And my third and fourth sons were too little to play on the team. So they were coming, they would play in the dugout when the big boys were out in the field, and then they would run out of the dugout when the big boys came in. And that kind of happened all the time. And as the big boys were coming in, they realized, the 2 little ones realized that they were getting trapped in there because they hadn't been paying attention. And now all the big boys from the field were rushing in. So they, being boys, they scrambled up a chain link fence and jumped over the top of it. And my fourth son was crazy. We always said he had no fear and no common sense. And he jumped over the fence and ran off. My third son, who was much more cautious at the time, climbed over the fence, got his shoelace stuck, and I watched him fall. And he fell face first and hit the only rock at the field and put his teeth through his lip and cut up his face pretty badly and things like that. So I had to take him to the hospital. And my ex didn't come home that night. And I couldn't find him. I didn't know where he was. So that was 2 days before Mother's Day. And then on Mother's Day, he did come home the next day, but he let us know he was not happy to be there. On Mother's Day, we went out to dinner. We went out to dinner on my credit card. And that night was the night he said he didn't want this. I'd been walking on eggshells and trying to, be the submissive wife, be everything that at this point my faith had increased from more just checking off boxes and attending church once a week and saying that's good enough to really trying to figure out, okay, God, what do you want from me? And I certainly was not the perfect wife before that. Oh gosh, there's so much I could go into. I feel like I don't want to tell too much and take up too much of your time. But, I had heard God tell me that at one point earlier in our relationship that if I didn't stop what I was doing, I would end up divorced. And I was arguing back with God and saying, but it's not about me, it's about him. And God was saying very calmly, it's about you. You have to change what you're doing. And I just kept arguing back, but God, he's doing X, Y, and Z. And God just said, it's not about him, it's about you. And I'd say, but it's about him doing this and that and the other thing. And God very calmly said, it's not about him, it's about you. So this is now a couple of years after that conversation with God. And I was trying to do everything right. And this all happened. And at that night when we had gone out to dinner for Mother's Day, and I came and said, I don't know what to do, but if something happens like this with the kids, I need you to be home with us. And he jumped up off the couch and said, actually, you can't count on me for anything anymore. I'm never coming home. And I don't want this. I'm going to be 40. This isn't how I planned my life. And I'm leaving.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Right.
That is just, it's so hurtful, and it's so full of rejection. And
Yeah.
rejection is, I think, one of the worst things we can go through as people. And I think that that's where a lot of wounds come from. So tell us, Kerri, tell us about that moment. Like, what was going through your mind? And of course, you're pregnant also. That part really got me. You're just really vulnerable when you're pregnant, and especially when you have other little kids. And it sounds like you were sensing something also. It seems like you were trying to make things work, like maybe he was slowly slipping away. I don't know. Or if it was a complete shock.
It was definitely a complete shock. Like I said, our marriage definitely had huge ups and downs, and we had some really hard times over the years, and times where we did want to separate and leave. To me, like, I guess, you know what, my grandparents were amazing role models, and we used to hear their stories of their fights, and they had some crazy fights where they didn't talk to each other. My mom grew up in I believe it was a 5th floor walk-up apartment with two bedrooms, and she was one of 5 children. She had 4 siblings, and, she and her sister slept on the couch, and it was just, a tight family. And there were times where my grandparents didn't talk to each other, even in that little tiny apartment, for a long time. So, but they always came back together in love. And I guess that's the way I saw our relationship too, was, oh my gosh, we're going through this horrible, fierce fighting time, but we're going to come back together in love. Like, that's just what families do. Sometimes it's really hard. And, I certainly didn't always handle everything well, but I never thought it would be the end of our relationship either. Looking back, I wish I had never. That's one thing I would say to anybody going through a hard time, is take divorce off the table. When you think, well, if he doesn't do this, or I'm going to try everything and then walk away, that's recipe for disaster. You've got to take divorce off the table for anybody who's having a hard time.
Right. There was I think it was the blog post that I read that you shared about a time that, and I know I brought this up before, but it was a pivotal moment where you were kind of feeling like just desperate. It was after that point, and you had some crosses or crucifixes that you were flinging into the backyard. Do you want to share that moment with you? Because it was a turning point. It was a moment of desperation, but also a turning point for you. So can you kind of share it in your words?
Yeah, absolutely. So when he told me on Mother's Day he was leaving, he moved out a week later. So we had literally 7 days to prepare for all this. And I was a stay-at-home mom. I had just been made part-time youth minister of our church, but that was more of a volunteer position than anything. Everything was crazy. That summer, about 4 months later, I did give birth to that beautiful baby boy who all the health concerns and everything turned out to be nothing. He was just absolutely the most amazing, wonderful kid ever, and has been since day one. I want to say my ex texted me on the baby's due date and said he had filed for a divorce that day. And then like a week later or so, he had, I don't know, maybe it was a little more than a week later, and my timing might be a little bit off on this, but he had taken somebody out to dinner on my credit card, and he hadn't been paying child support, and everything was it was terrible. And emotionally, forget even the financial and the practical reason, like practical needs that a family goes through in divorce, the mental and emotional and spiritual beating that my boys and I took was just incredible. And when I got that credit card statement and I called the company, I was like, and they were like, yeah. And they described the woman that he had gone out with, and they described him. And I went, oh my gosh, God, what are you doing in my life? And I took every cross off the walls of my house, flung them across the backyard. Roxanne, I never lost faith in God, but I didn't understand what the heck he was doing in my life and in my kids' lives. Like, how is this even possible? Like, I don't understand. I believed a lot of the family that prays together stays together, and all the nice things that we say. We did that. We went to church every Sunday. We said prayers around the dinner table. My husband and I held hands as we fell asleep every night. It was crazy. And I just was like, God, what are you doing? And then later that night, I found myself literally on my hands and knees in the dark, searching for God on the cross and just crawling across the lawn, trying to find every cross that I'd thrown across the backyard. And I was like, God, what, like, this is so far out of my hands. I'm even having a hard time speaking about it now because it's just like, how do we even put into words what was going on in my head or my heart at that time, never mind my soul. And I just felt the Holy Spirit just say, okay, surrender, like let God handle this, because this is so much bigger than anything I could deal with or that my kids could deal with. And it was the first time I really understood, I'm going to mess up the wording on it, but basically only the groans of the Holy Spirit will suffice. And that is so exactly what the wounds of divorce are, is just, okay, God, there are not even words for the pain that I'm feeling in this moment. You've got to handle this. It's got to be up to you, to express what is going on inside of me, because it's just too much for me to handle.
How old were your kids? I want to make sure I have like that picture in my mind. Obviously, your youngest, how far were you along in your pregnancy?
Yep. My kids were, when their dad left, my kids were 11, 10, 7, and 5. And I was 5 months pregnant.
So that was traumatic for them too. And of course, all boys, and that's their dad. And that alone, is just shattering. And again, I just can't even imagine. I know there's other people listening who have probably experienced, whether it's divorce or some other situation where it felt like the earth fell out below their feet. And you chose to trust somehow, or at least to grasp for that trust in that moment. But obviously, it wasn't like everything, just automatically, like, surrender doesn't mean that every moment is wonderful. So how did things kind of go from there? You seem to kind of be making a renewed commitment to God, trusting. What was your soul like after that point?
Well, I just want to back up for 1 second, because I was having a really hard time. And it's interesting because I had been made youth minister of our church, but I was still doing a lot of checking boxes with the go to church, pray, whatever, just do whatever. But I really hadn't been doing daily Bible reading, or hadn't been doing a lot of things that I understand that I should be now. My 11-year-old, he turned 12 that summer, is just amazing. And he had just finished 6th grade CCD. And came to me one day when I was probably having a breakdown. And he just said, Mom, you've got to read the book of Job. He's like, you're going to be like Job. God is going to take care of our family. And I was like, what? Like this 11-year-old now, or 12-year-old, I forget. He was like shortly after his dad left, so I'm not sure he turned 12 in that summer. And I just was like, okay. And I went and read the book of Job and was just like, okay. Actually, it was funny because Job's daughter, after this, the story of Job, he loses basically everything, including his children and his health and everything. And then he has a second family kind of, and one of his daughters is named Kezia. And that was actually the name that I picked out for my fifth son. If he had been born female, obviously, if he had been a girl, his name would have been named after the daughter in Job's story also.
Wow.
Yeah. So that began me, that was like, okay, you know what? He knows something that I don't know. This little 11-year-old kid is telling me to read the Bible. And why haven't I ever done that? I was Catholic. I didn't really make the connection between the readings in Mass and the Bible that the Protestants read. And it was so interesting to say, oh, wait a minute, there's actually, those readings are from the Bible. What does the Bible say? Should I go more in depth? And so on. I began a daily Bible, like my coffee with Jesus time, where I just sat every morning and I would read one small section. So not even a whole chapter. I just read that little heading to heading and just sit with one tiny section and be like, okay, open the Bible up, spiritual, okay, Holy Spirit, tell me what you want me to know today. And I pretty much started in the New Testament and just did that until I heard God really speaking to me. And I would journal about that. And then I began reading okay, let's start from the beginning and go through the Bible piece by piece in a more sequential manner.
Yeah, one of the things I guess I was really impressed with, again, coming back to that single mom smiling, that somehow you were able to find your smile again. And that was the hope and what drew me into your story because, yes, I was intrigued with what happened to you, but I also wanted to know how it ended. And, obviously it's not ended yet, but we're still on a journey. But I've just watched you then through the years as we've been friends from afar, and actually you got to swing through my home here one time on a little trip with your sons, and that was a joy. I got to meet a couple of times in person. Another time when I was in Pennsylvania, we got to have a slumber party and giggled until midnight or whatever it was. So we've had those times. So I've been able to peek at you from afar, and your faith just is just, you've been really resilient. And so I how did that kind of continue with your faith, and what sort of things? Obviously you started slow, you were doing your Bible readings, and then how did things move along, and how did God keep, being the hound of heaven in your life, and to the point where, it would have been easy. And I do want to talk about this a little bit, Kerri, too, because I'm kind of going all over the place, but I'm thinking about the process of sort of figuring it out with the church and where your place is, so we can answer the question, is there a place for the divorced in church? What was your relationship with the church like during that time, and what were some of the ups and downs with that part of it?
Yeah, well, you know what? In a lot of ways, so I live in a small town now. I was youth minister. I was CYO basketball coach. I was a PTA mom at the elementary school. I was very involved in a lot of activities. And in so many ways, our family, our church, and even strangers in town supported us. We had people drop off firewood so we could heat the house. We were Thanksgiving family food basket number 7. We had people drop off Christmas gifts. So many people dropped off material support, and the church was really great about that. The spiritual side, I think, is where it was harder. And you know what, Roxanne, there's going to be some places in here where I'm still not totally sure of where responsibility lies, because there's such a stigma and such a self-imposed shame on divorce. So I know that some of it was me going, I don't want to go and face these people. And there was such a feeling of shame and like, I don't fit in here. I don't belong here. And, in the divorce crowds, we talk about the scarlet letter D of divorce. The scarlet letter marked I forget, Anne Hawthorne, was it? But now it's like the scarlet letter D, and you just feel like it's emblazoned on you, and everybody at church is judging you and looking at you. And to be honest, I think some of it is because that's how I felt, and I felt like I was doing that. But at the same time, I also know that there was actually really people who turned their backs on me, who didn't talk to me. I said something to one of my friends, and I was like, what happened? Like, so many people I was youth minister here. I was CYO basketball coach here. I was super involved in our church. What happened, and why don't people talk to me? And what my friend said, which was another turning point, like click that switch in my head, was, you know what, they see that if it happened to you, it could happen to them. And they don't want to come to the point where they understand that their marriages are also, in jeopardy, or that, does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I can apply that to any kind of suffering. I do think for example, let's just talk about, say the unhoused or the homeless. Sometimes I think people don't want to deal with that because it's scary. What if you get too close, and then, we're always like one paycheck away, or whatever, whatever the situation is, it's scary. And I think that relationship with God has to be so strong, and you have to know so much who you are in his eyes before you can go. And so sometimes that has to be strengthened. And it sounds like that was something that needed to happen with you, for you to really know how beloved you were in God's eyes, so that any of those extraneous things could not affect you. But of course they do. And it's a challenge to us, because especially I was thinking about your situation. It wasn't like you wanted the divorce. Who would be pregnant with your 5th child, and you're abandoned by your husband, who goes back to a high school girlfriend after 9/11.
Right,
It's tragic. And that's the time that you would have needed love and understanding, but it's like you were just rejected even further.
Right. I think that there's a common misconception out there that divorce is two people who have irreconcilable differences, and they just want different things. And, everybody moves on. Children are resilient, blah, blah, blah. And if you listen to the stories of people who have been through divorce, and this is not just female, this is men too. Like, and some of the guys who have it the hardest are the men who have been left in abandonment. Those are real serious wounds, is when a man has been walked away from. But either way, I think that what you would find if you actually sit and talk to the people who are so, like, they're today's modern lepers in some ways, that at least the ones that are trying to remain faithful to the church, that divorce is not usually a mutually agreed on thing. Most divorces are through some sort of type of abandonment. And the wounds of abandonment, like, we know abandonment wounds for children, but I think the abandonment wounds for adults are really devastating also. And then those wounds are portrayed on our children, and the cycle is just incredible.
Right. And it's not like it's going to end. Like, that's a forever wound that is going to keep being reopened and reopened. I mean, whether you have kids or not, there's that bond that was there that is no more. And like, the story has been shattered. Right. The story that you thought you were walking into has been shattered. So you have to find another story to give you, to tether you. So you did that. I'm going to take a little break here, and we'll be back with more. I want to hear a little bit about some of the challenges you faced as a single mom of 5 boys without a father in the house, first of all, because I want to give us a feeling for what you went through. And then we're going to get to the hope and how you dealt with all that and the hope that you found. So we will be right back with Kerri Bishop and more with Matters of Soul Importance after this little break.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. I have my friend Kerri Bishop from New York on the line. We are talking about, is there a place for the divorced in church? And so we're kind of moving through her story. So Kerri, go ahead and share a little bit about what it was like. Where were you at emotionally? What sort of things did you have to do to try to make this work? And then we'll bring God into the picture.
Oh, gosh. You know what, Roxanne, I don't even know that I can explain everything that was going on and where I was emotionally, mentally. Some days are so crystal clear. I can remember every minute of it. And then some days are just such a blur. I remember one of the things that I just kept thinking of was, gosh, you know what? I don't remember the name of the family, and I wish I did. But there was a family, a woman who drowned her 5 kids in Texas. Do you remember that story?
Yes. Andrea something,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah. And that was about the same time. And I was just horrified. And, I had been through some baby blues. Luckily, I never had postpartum depression, but, there's a hormone letdown after pregnancy. And I was nursing, and, mastitis kicked in, and I was having some, just everything, I guess. And I just kept thinking, like, oh my gosh, what if, and the what ifs will kill you in divorce and in any situation. I think that's the same thing, for a cancer survivor, or there's just anything, like the what ifs are just not a good place to go. But what if, God, I end up having postpartum depression and I hurt these kids? How could my husband leave? It doesn't even matter what he thinks about me. How could he do this to his kids? That's just a horrible thing. And, what if the house burns down? Like, God, which kids do I get out first? How do I get 5 boys if there's a fire or a car accident? Or, your mind starts playing those games with you of what happens. It was really amazing because we actually did have people are calling it a mini tornado. We don't get many of those in New York, but there was a strong storm that came through and it knocked a tree down. The tree crashed in my bedroom window, hit off the front porch. And actually the bedroom, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we were building that house ourselves. So my husband left me with, okay, so we were building a house, and he was the carpenter building it. He left me with a half-built house. So
I was wondering about the house. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. Okay.
Right. We weren't getting a lot of child support was sporadic. And now to save money and things, I was having the 4 boys sleep in my bedroom. One of my children decided, he was really hurt. They were all hurt, I guess, but this one decided he was going to sleep on the couch in the living room and just feed the fireplace with firewood all night. So he had his time there. But the other boys and I all slept in one bedroom with a space heater to try and save money. And that tree came crashing through that window, and it was scary. It was like, oh my gosh, how do I do this with
at that point, I'm thinking, I would say, God, like that is enough. Like what?
Like literally,
what?
God, are you freaking kidding me? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? What else? Yeah, and I'm
through the
laughing
bedroom
now.
where I'm trying to, you're a mama duckling trying to keep your little babies under their wings, and then then there's a big log that comes into like what?
Right,
Yeah.
right. It was it was so crazy. I very quickly tried to get a plan. Luckily, we had been doing the Dave Ramsey plan, so I did have some money. I'm Dave Ramsey financial coach now, but even before that, I had figured out we had been in debt for a whole bunch of things from the beginning of our marriage. I put us on a Dave Ramsey plan. We were in a good place financially when my husband left, which was so helpful. And I was able to take that money and pay some tuition. I started immediately setting long-term goals of how do I update my elementary teaching license, which is another kind of funny thing because New York State said it would take 60 college credits for me to update my teaching license because they knew so much more about child development than they knew when I graduated. And I was like, I have 5 children. I know so much more about child development than a 22-year-old with a piece of paper in her hands. I had my master's in education, but that wasn't good enough for New York State.
Wow.
So that was another, like, okay, how do I get a job that is going to cover the bills? So I researched and I thought back to, well, what was more marketable, elementary school teaching or something like math and science. And I looked into both. Science required a lot of lab work, which I couldn't do with 5 kids because I didn't have that time. Math, I was able to teach myself the math tests out of classes and put together a pathway to certification that had never been done in New York State before. So I did, if you look at my transcripts, I had like 10 different colleges. I took classes on Sundays down in Manhattan. I'm not a city person at all. My poor mom got a ticket on her car because I parked it illegally down there. There's just, it was crazy. But through it all, I see God working with me. Like, I am not a math person at all. So for me to get that certification was kind of like a mini miracle. And actually, I think that I'm still like, when I do factoring, I'm like, oh my gosh, to my students, I'm like, guys, can you believe this works? Who knew split the middle? Like, actually, it's the coolest thing in the world. Because I struggled, I'm able to break algebra down into like bite-sized manageable pieces and explain it really well. So I don't know that I'd be a great calculus teacher, but I believe I'm a really good algebra teacher because of the struggles that I've had. And I can look at my faith and my, divorce and everything in the same way I look at algebra and say, you know what, because I've struggled, I have such a heart to see other people. And sometimes that makes me feel like, there's no excuses, suck it up and do it and stop complaining. And sometimes it just, which I think some people get so caught up in that. And I can do that too, where I'm just like, oh, woe is me. My life is so terrible, blah, blah, blah. And instead it's like, okay, life is hard, deal with it. What's God trying to teach you here? What other pathway are you not seeing? I never would have seen a pathway to math certification, and that's what I got.
Wow. Yeah. What do you think it was? Now I'm kind of asking for some introspection that you might not be prepared for, but that caused you to cling to God. I mean, I know you had a faith life and you were raised in the faith, but not everyone goes in that direction. Some people get mad at God and walk away. What do you think caused you to do the opposite of that and actually go further into your faith and not push away, but to dive in a way where you're going into math, which you've shared with me isn't your favorite subject by any means, and it's not mine. I would be terrified to go in that direction. But you were in survival mode, I guess, but yet you were willing to grasp onto God's hand. And that's something we're all supposed to do and all supposed to learn. And that's one of the reasons suffering is allowed and that God does allow it. He wants to get closer to us, right? And that's what happened in your life. That's what's so beautiful about your story. So I don't know if you can explain it all, but that's what happened. What are some other ways that God kept showing up and just helped you know that you were going to be okay?
Well, I don't ever want to give the impression that I wasn't angry with God, because I was furious. And, I kept thinking, like, I remember I was shopping for groceries at one time, and this was very shortly after my husband left. I don't even know, I might have still been pregnant, but it was very shortly after. And I watched an older woman berate and humiliate her husband so badly in the grocery store. And the man just quietly sat there, kind of with his eyes looking down, with his head bowed a little bit, and just like you could see like a tightness to his jaw. And he just sat there and took it. And I was like, God, I never would have done that to my husband. How come this couple is together and probably has been together for years, and I, who never would think of doing this? Like, how, I need to start doing the comparison game where you look at this couple. Well, I'm so much better than that couple. Why are they together? And that's just such a bad place to be. I think that, with the faith, I did leave the Catholic, I didn't totally leave the Catholic Church. I kept taking my boys, but on Sundays where it was just me alone. And I'll tell you, there is nothing as wounding as losing your kids. Like, I hate to say it, but I could really care less about what my ex is doing now. But to be fired as wife and full-time mother was just devastating. And losing my kids and still having that wound is horrible. So on the Sundays where I didn't have my kids, especially when this was all new, I didn't want to go to church and have people say, oh, where are the kids? Like, that's the worst, one of the worst things you can say to somebody going through this, because where the kids are. They're with their dad. Don't ask stupid questions. I hate to say it. And people try to mean well, but that was just so hurtful to have to verbalize that every time. And then see their looks of pity. Like, I don't want your pity. I want like something, but I want help.
Friendship. Caring.
Right. So I did go to some other churches. I really found a lot of value in other churches too. I went to this great non-denominational church, and I went to this Grace 101 class, and it was to see, are you going to join the church or are you not? And in this church, the pastor put a bullseye on like a bulletin board, not a bulletin board, a blackboard or whiteboard or whatever they're called. And he said, if you're going to be part of our church, this is what you have to believe. And it was the center of the bullseye. And he said, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. To be a part of our church, you have to believe in the Trinity. And then each progressive ring, he talked about different things until finally the outer ring, he was like, well, this is what music we have here, but you can listen to you can listen to Gregorian chant or Christian rap or whatever. The music doesn't define members of our church. It's just kind of what we do in this area. And it made a lot of sense to me. And then the other thing he said, and it made me start thinking about, what are my core beliefs? Is my core belief that I go and check a box every Sunday? Or is my core belief that there's something bigger than that? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing he said was that 70% of his church, and this was it's not a Texas mega church, but for New York, this was a giant church with 3 campuses and everything else. And he said 70% of their people in the congregation were ex-Catholics. And I was like, wow, do I want to be part of that 70%? Or do I dig into my Catholic faith and see if there's something worth leaving? Am I going to divorce my faith the way my husband divorced me? Do I divorce God the way my husband divorced me? Do I abandon?
Wow, that's an insight. Yeah.
Right. And I was like, well, if I don't believe in divorce, there better be something here, or, what's going on here? And I talked to that pastor after, and actually he was one of the people that, like, really, he probably doesn't know this, but brought me back to being Catholic, because he said, you know what, you're one of the few not angry ex-Catholics that he's ever met. He said, usually people join their church because they're angry at the Catholic Church. And I said, well, one of the things that I'm struggling with is not what you have here, because I love everything in this non-denominational church. It's what you don't have. And I was thinking, like, their kids don't know the Lord's Prayer. They can't stand up and say the Lord's Prayer. How do you have a Christian family that doesn't know the Lord's Prayer? But he said, oh, you mean like the Nicene Creed? We don't stand up and profess our beliefs every week. And I said, wow, I wasn't even thinking that. But yeah, there's something to that, where you stand and verbally in front of everybody else profess your beliefs. Well, what are my core beliefs? And then from there, it started digging in. Okay, is the Eucharist real? Is confession real? I hated confession, where I had to go and like be honest and be real about, okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is my part in the divorce. This is what I did leading up to this. And that takes courage. It takes humility. It's hard. especially when you're wounded already. But I think you need to do that to recover from the wounds, which I think people don't understand. Like in the Catholic Church, or confessing your sins when you're like, wait a minute, but my sins aren't as bad as his sins.
Right.
But it's still, it's such a cleansing, healing process. And to do it continuously and feel like, okay, I just went to confession this week and was like, all right, I really blew it this week. I've come this far and I'm still a sinner. So all of that brought me to the Catholic Church. I think the time in silence, and let me tell you, for a mom of 5 boys, finding time in silence is like almost impossible. Some of the hardships we face, where I could go into the court system too, but I was literally sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night for years because there was so much to do, and my head was so, I also took a lot on, and I honestly look back and I don't know how I could have cut things back. But learning to say, I need silence. Roxanne, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but there was one day I went to the church and it was just me and the tabernacle. And above the tabernacle is the cross with Jesus displayed, arms outstretched and whatever. And I was just, basically complaining to God, like I do a lot, about this person and that person, and the wounds that had happened from childhood and then college and then finally my husband and all the things, and just like, God, let me go back a little bit too. I think one of the things that you find in a lot of divorce cases is re-victimization. So you don't get many people that had healthy childhoods that end up in a situation like mine or in another divorce situation. I have a group of almost 1,000 Catholic single moms now, and the numbers of cases of past abuse along with divorce are just incredible. But
because our wounds, when we get into a divorce, or when we get into a marriage, our past comes with us.
Right.
And then we have to share that past with the other person. And probably a lot of it has kind of been pushed aside. So it's going to come out at that point.
Right. And the other person is dealing with his broken past too, like all of us are broken. And by the time you get to be 25 or so, you probably had some wounds from something somewhere at this point in the game. So you're bringing all of that in. But this day I was in church and I was just complaining to God and like, God, again, how could you let another man hurt me? How could this happen again? And he just very clearly said to me, you need to forgive. And I was like, no way. I'm not, like, you don't understand. And Jesus, I heard his voice say from the cross, then I'll stay here until you're ready. And I was like, fine, then stay, And I sat in the pew by myself and I looked up at the cross and he's like, are you ready now? And I was like, no, stay there. And I waited a while and he said, can I get down now? And I was like, no, stay. And I just left Jesus hanging on the cross, and he was just letting me know, like, I didn't just die for you. I died for everybody who hurt you too. And he was willing to stay there. And he was willing to take I don't know if vengeance is the right word. That's not really what I'm looking for, but he was willing, it sounds so cliche, but he was willing to take the punishment for what they had done to me, not only for what I had done, but what had been done to me. And that was such a clear, like, okay, I forgive everybody, everything. And I walked out of that church that day, like, I want these people in heaven with me. I don't know that I want to embrace them in heaven. I don't know that I want to give them hugs in heaven, but everybody who's hurt me for anything I've ever gone through, I want them in heaven.
Wow. You have had some of the most amazing conversations, intimations with Jesus.
Right.
He really is close to the brokenhearted, and he had a very big heart for a single mom who did not want to be single, who wanted to honor her marriage, who was abandoned. He wanted to see you through this thing, but he knew you were going to suffer too, and he was willing to suffer with you. And that is just so beautiful. Your story there's just so many pieces to it that are that we can take something and learn from it. And I got really emotional when you were talking about Jesus being up on that cross and having that conversation with you, and just imagining what that must have been like, that intimate moment with him when he let you know that he loved you and he loves and is with you through all of that suffering and loves the people that unfortunately have caused you to suffer as well. That's such a big moment. I had a healing moment also where I was able to forgive some people in my past. And it is so freeing. It is so freeing. Everything changes when you can do that. So I'm so grateful.
Right.
But go ahead. Continue on from there.
Yeah, no, I think, forgiveness it's a tough thing. And I still have to be like, my ex just texted me something the other day and I was like, what? And okay, God, I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to text him back. I'm just going to forgive him in this moment. So that total healing of what Jesus gave me that day, but it had also been like, I can't wait for Jesus to heal everything at once. It had been a constant submission to the Lord saying, okay, what do you want from me in this moment? What do I need to forgive? I can't forgive everything, but I can forgive this one little thing. I can forgive just that next one little thing. And it's a progression that brings you to the cross. And then that final healing moment of Jesus at the cross. And then I think you said at the beginning of the episode, something about, that brought you to this moment where you're all through it. And then you corrected yourself and said, well, I know you're not through it because it's ongoing. And that is such, you're totally right. I'm really great for the most part. I have an amazing life. I've traveled the country talking to people about what's good about America. I've done so many amazing things that I couldn't have done had my husband not left. But there are still days where I am that same person that just, falls to the bathroom floor and cries and just says, I can't get up today. Like, God, what are you doing in my life? It is a continuous, like, okay, get up another day. Some days it's just willpower and saying, I'm going to do it. I'm going to push through. Some days it's like, okay, I have to have a little self-care, a little gentleness for myself. And it's a matter of figuring out which to, where to go at what moment, I guess, and never being stuck in either place.
Well, we are works in progress, and I think we can all attest to that, any human being. What I love, though, Kerri, is that you've taken some of those lessons that you've learned and some of that grace from God and through this very, very hard thing, and now you have a heart for others. So share a little bit about, if unless we're skipping ahead too quickly, but I think it's kind of the right time to start sharing about how you have applied some of these beautiful lessons that you've received and these gifts. Like, it's when God loves us, we want to love others, like it spills over. And so your heart is spilling over for others. So tell us about your coaching and all of the ways you have helped others.
Well, you know what? It's really interesting, Roxanne. Sometimes God literally brings people to your doorstep. And I feel like that's what he did with me, because there was a woman from my town whose husband was cheating on her. And it's a small town, so I kind of heard her name, but I didn't know, I wouldn't recognize her. I didn't know her face. I didn't know anything. And she showed up on my doorstep one day, just sobbing hysterically. And she said, I heard that you're in a bad situation, that your husband left. She's like, my husband is cheating on me and I don't know what to do about it. And it was such a moment of, oh my gosh, I don't know what to tell this woman. I can hold this space for her and cry with her and talk to her and try and reassure her. But at that point, my life was still so upside down that I didn't know like how to help her. And you know what? A lot of it is, how do you help somebody? It's so easy to give practical help, like food, clothing, shelter, the financials, all that stuff. But how do you wound a broken heart and a damaged soul? Like, those wounds are so much deeper. I guess I heard God tell me at that moment that I had been the first one in my situation, my circle of friends, my family, whatever, to go through something like this, but I would not be the last. And it was so clear. God speaks to me so clearly sometimes, and I'm so blessed to have that experience. But I knew without a doubt that he was telling me to do something. I just wasn't always sure what that was. I began blogging. That's where I think you saw Single Mom Smiling.
Yep.
I blogged in secret because I would like, all right, God, I'll do what you're telling me, but don't ask me to step out of my comfort zone. Don't make me tell anybody else like of the pain that I'm really feeling inside. Like, it's too private, too personal. So it's one thing to let strangers on the internet read it. And I'm going to trust God to send the women who need to hear this story to me. And I really met some amazing men and women that have, just found me organically. I believe God sent them to me, and I was able to, step in and, be part of a pro-life thing where, women would come to me and be like, I'm pregnant, I'm thinking of an abortion. What do I do? And I'm like, no, hold on to that baby, because there is no way that I would ever trade a man that would leave for a baby that God gives me. Right. So I started blogging in secret, and then eventually I came out a little bit, but it was kind of like, oh, all right. And then as I got to be more comfortable with blogging, that's when God gave me the job that, put my family on a more firm financial footing, but now I don't have time to do God's will in the blogging. And it was kind of like, okay, where do I go from here? And how do I, maintain my family, like the teaching and things that would provide for my family, and also do that. And I have to say, I kind of let that slide a little bit, but God has clearly called me and said, look, we need to, step it up, come out of your comfort zone. And that's where I've started the podcast. I do life coaching. I have financial coaching that I do. Really, one of the biggest things I'm doing is forming a community where in January, I'm hoping to launch, or I have a plan to launch a Fiercely Beloved program, where it's a physical, there's 7 different domains: spiritual, physical, and just like body, mind, and soul. Let's get it all in shape together. And just really providing outreach and togetherness.
That sounds great. Well, by the time this drops, you'll just be a month away from that. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
And people can go to your website and learn more about that. Do you have a favorite scripture passage or anything that has kind of led you? Obviously, it depends on the moment and the day, right? But is there one that kind of was that rock for you when you were kind of feeling, again, like I said, the earth falling out below your feet, or anything that you kind of come back to?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think we talked about the book of Job, which I think is so important to us. I really loved Romans, the whole thing, because that was like, it took so much of like the sexuality and so much of like the morality of what we're facing today in this crazy world. And that was like, oh my gosh, there's more to this than I thought, and more to it than just do this, don't do that. Like Romans took the beauty of it and like really was like eye-opening. But as far as actual verses, I think there are 2 that I would say just really hit home to me. One is James 1, perseverance and trial. The entire section there was so incredible, but can I read it to you really quickly?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. It says, "Consider it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials, for you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and let your perseverance be perfect, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." And it goes on from there. I thought, like, consider it all joy. Are you kidding, God? Like, you want me to find joy in this? Like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, you don't know what I'm going through, which of course is ridiculous.
Maybe that's your book title. Are you kidding, God?
I love that. I so might do that. You're so right. I love that.
Because you said that a few times.
That is definitely a theme. Like, Roxanne, I mean, I even got run over by a school bus. Like, there's so many things like, like, are you kidding? And even with that, Roxanne, it was instant forgiveness of that man who was speeding and texting. Like, God allowed that to happen. So I don't know why he allowed it to happen, but there's just instant forgiveness. Like, okay, I've come to the point where I'm still hurting sometimes. I still have injuries. The wounds don't go away, but the forgiveness doesn't go away either. I just want to forgive.
What a beautiful thing. Not always easily achieved, but you had that moment in the chapel, and it's like that something clicked there. That was a beautiful insight and you've had so many of those. It's just amazing.
Marian consecration was another. Yeah, just amazing.
Yeah. So like if we came back, well,
can I give you one more scripture verse?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, sorry. This one's actually my favorite. And it's the way the Gospels end, John 21, verse 25. It says, "There are also many other things that Jesus did, but if these were to be described individually, I do not think the whole world would contain the books that would be written." Roxanne, I joke all the time about if I just live long enough to read all the books I bought, I'll be a happy woman.
Yes.
But I look at this and I'm thinking, there are so many things that Jesus did just in my life that nobody knows about. How much did he do when he returned? Like that just blows me away, because there's so many things that Jesus does that we can't even begin to describe them if we just open our hearts and say, okay, God, I surrender. Like, nothing is going to bother me. And that's not quite 100% true all the time. I definitely get bothered sometimes, but for the most part, you know what? Bring it on, world. I'm good.
Well, yeah. And think about it. You're one person, and think about all of the people in the world and whoever lived. And like Jesus has been doing things in everyone's life, whether they see it or not.
Right.
It's just a matter of recognizing it. And faith is a gift. And we recognize that. And our job as people who've been given that gift is to try to live our lives in a way that others would be attracted to it and that would have that. And so you're doing that in part through your ministries. And obviously God is preparing you for something else, and you're ready. You just take the next step, whatever he tells you, you pop into there as when you're prepared. So
Roxanne, my greatest desire now is, even beyond being wife and mother and all that, is just to be a saint. Like, honestly, that is my whole goal. Is
you're aiming high, girl.
Right. Exactly.
We all should. Yeah.
Right. That is the goal. Like, yeah, that's the goal. That there's so much going on that the world can't contain books and the love that God has for us.
Let me break down really quick before we kind of wrap things up and answer that question again. Is there a place for the divorced in church? We know the answer is yes, but it's not always easy. But before I go into the church part of it, what would be some steps that you could offer for maybe someone that's going through this, that just had the bottom of the earth fall out from underneath them right now, maybe as they're listening to this week? What would be some first steps that you could tell them to kind of keep the grounding from, not falling apart?
Yeah, you know what? It's so hard to know because each situation is a little bit different, a little bit individualized.
Right.
I would say you have to take care of your four walls, your four practical walls, your housing, your clothing, food, shelter. And I think that one of the biggest things and one of the hardest things sometimes is that we rely on our government to do that. And I'll tell you, we didn't even begin to get into the social services and the court systems and how corrupt and how they're just heartless, which I understand they have to be, but it's so soul sucking, soul sucking. So if you need that help, it's really better to go to your local church and start with that community. It's so hard because at that point you've got to make eye contact with people and people get to know you, and the drive, I guess, that's not exactly the word I'm looking for, but the pull for somebody who's wounded like this is to remain anonymous. Like, I just want to go and collect my Social Security or my, not Social Security, my WIC or my food stamps or my, child, whatever, from a place where I don't have to make eye contact, where nobody knows the shame that I'm feeling. And, the government is great because the government could care less about you. So it keeps you in those cycles of, you want food stamps, then you've got to come in during working hours. Well, how is a single mom supposed to work and be at the food stamp place and bring her kids from place to place? The government systems don't make sense. Going to churches, going to local food pantries, going to personal things where people know you and get to love you and you can start to build a trust network is so important. So I think when you're doing those practical needs and when you're addressing those practical needs, really being humble and open to coming out of your comfort zone, which is so hard when you're like,
yes,
I just want to curl up in a ball. The last thing I want to do is push my comfort zone.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. Yeah. Anything else? That's really good advice. It seems very human to me.
Yeah. I think that's big. You know what? Big picture, small goals, like with getting the mass certification. I needed 60 college credits to get mass certification. If I had looked at the 60 college credits, I would have been like, oh my gosh, it's no way I'm going to do that. But I was like, I look at the 60 college credits. What do I need in this moment? I can take this one class and get 3 credits. And then I could take that one class and get another 3 credits. And I can call this person because that person knows 2 other people that can tell me how to get those 3 credits. So it's kind of like set big goals, but don't expect them to happen overnight. Just break everything down super small and be content and really rejoice. And when I got those 3 credits, I was like, dang, look at that. I got 3 math credits and I'm not a math person. That's incredible. And the same thing with your kids. The thing that I would say is my biggest regret is that I wasn't the mom that I wanted to be with my kids. I was so caught up in my own hurt and questioning my own self-worth. Literally needing to provide food, housing, shelter, transportation, that, I worked round the clock. Like I said, I slept for 2 to 3 hours a night. I shook for 6 to 8 months. going to court would put me in a setback a little bit, and I'd have to like repositive in myself or something. I don't know what the word is there. You know, and I wish I had taken more time to sit one-on-one. And I tried, but how do you find time to do all of that? And then,
you know what? You were in survival mode though, too.
Yes.
So, I mean, you can only do what you can do. But one of the phrases from the Our Father that's jumping out at me as far as what you're trying to convey is give us this day our daily bread. And that's not always food. It's just the daily sustenance, whatever it is, whatever grace that God is going to give us, just to rely daily. Like you were saying, don't get too far ahead. You just have to do whatever's in front of you. But look at now, you're at a different season now, and you've broken free of some of those things that that you were having to work out, and God has been there. You can look back now and see how He's traveled with you. So let's circle back to that driving question. Is there a place, Kerri, for the divorced in church? What is your response to that?
We could wrap up this whole conversation with a 3-letter word, and that's yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot the church can do differently. I'm not a fan of a lot of the annulments that, that's a whole nother topic and things like that. But there is definitely a place for the church. And for the single moms or single dads too, that feel that there's not a place for them, you know what, just keep going, keep putting one foot in front of the other. It's just like any other relationship. You just keep showing up. Your first relationship has got to be with God, then your children, then your church, and you have to keep going. And if you find a place that is really ostracizing you, and some places certainly do, but always look at yourself too and say, where could I be more outgoing? Where could I be more welcoming? And it's so hard because people don't want to be welcoming. They want to be welcomed. But maybe it's up to us too to say, you know what? I'm going to share my story. I'm going to tell about my wounds. I'm going to, embrace the next person, because we don't know what other people are going to either. We feel very, put down because we're divorced, but there might be a single mom or a widowed mom, or somebody going through cancer, or somebody who's facing something else. There's just so much going on that we don't know. It's like that quote from, the end of the Gospels. There's so much going on that it's just wouldn't even fill all the books in the world.
Right. All we can contribute is a sentence or two, but we want to do that. We want to be vessels for the Lord, because He has been so good to us, and He's been so good to you, Kerri. And I'm so glad that you turned to Him in your time in need, that we can, just be reminded of that ourselves, because it is a life of suffering, and all of that is preparation to be with Him. We let go of things in this earth so that we can say yes to God. So thank you so much for sharing your stories and your beautiful insights. And where can people find you? We'll put some links in the show notes, but just share right now the easiest way to get a hold of you.
Yeah, that would be great. You can reach me at either my website or my podcast. Both are Single Mom Smiling. That's MOM, not moms, but Single Mom Smiling. And you can always send me an email at Kerri, KERRI, at singlemomsmiling.com.
All right. Well, you take care. Have a good day. Thanks again. And have a good teaching year as well.
Thank you,
that's getting ready to get heated up.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's say some prayers for our students and teachers too. That'd be awesome.
Definitely. Is there a place for the divorced in church? After her unwanted divorce, Kerri admits it wasn't easy to return to the pews. She oftentimes felt alone, misunderstood, and rejected. But God's love proved too irresistible, and in time, He drew her back into His house, providing a solid framework on which to continue her path to sanctity. Her ultimate goal, and one she's re-inspired me to keep on the horizon as well. I did want to address a regret that Kerri voiced, that of not being able to be there for her children as much as she would have liked during those years of trying to survive. I know Kerri and what a committed mother she was and still is. Were there holes and imperfections? We can all ask this question of our relationships, and we will all answer the same. Of course. Thankfully, God lives in the present, and it's there where we find His second chances and opportunities for redos. And thank God for that. We can be hard on ourselves, but do we take as much of an account of the things we did right as wrong? Someday, we'll see it all more clearly And I believe on that day, Kerri will be surprised at how her many sacrifices and sufferings elevated not only her own family, but the souls of those around her. I'm so proud of the work she's done and is doing to love others the way God has loved her. Before I close, I wanted to highlight one quote of Kerri's that really touched me as someone who works in the pro-life ministry. She mentioned meeting abortion-minded women through her outreach and being able to help them see the value of the life within them, despite imperfect circumstances. She said, "Hold on to that baby. I would never trade a man that would leave for a baby that God gives me." We absolutely must begin to approach every new human life this way. Each human being is a gift through and through, and the more we realize this, the sooner God's good plan for humanity will manifest. Well, in our next episode, we're going to circle back to the beginning in a sense, talking to two gentlemen who helped reinvigorate my thought of launching a podcast after we had a discussion on another podcast one December several years ago to discuss religion. How would an atheist and a pastor answer the question, "Why should I believe in Jesus?" You'll find out next time. Until then, don't lose sight of the light.